I'm Harold Frederick Catherwood. I was born in Keedyke, Saskatchewan in 1924. And then we left there in 1934. Market crashed in 29, and at the same time, the drought started in the prairies. A lot of people were farmers, and consequently, the combination of the two pretty well forced them to leave that area. Or let us say Revelstoke, and then of course went south to Sidmouth, and he found that they could homestead land there for $2 for 40 acres, which at that time was a promising enough for the future. At least here, we could at least grow food. In the prairie, you couldn't even grow potatoes at that particular time. We were amazed to see so much water when we saw the Columbia River. But they went back, they started to pack, and they moved out in the latter part of the summer of 34. The fact that he had gotten a large automobile car to equipment and cattle. We brought 4 horses, 1 big pig, and I'm not sure about the number of cows, but I think there was 2 at least. And all the household effects and even equipment that we would need, like plows. And there was this little house, and there was enough room to build for a garden. That was all that was cleared. The rest of it was all slash burning. Well, not burning, but old slash of past logging. And it had been, by what an old timer told me, one of the most beautiful stands of cedar had been in Columbia. And that's why there was 3 sawmills. This is past history, though. These mills are long gone when we got there, but there had been in Arrowhead, and so after he got everything kind of unloaded and moved, then he had to start deciding on building. The old bunkhouse of this large mill in Arrowhead. At the time he bought it, there was no road down there to that mill. There only was a railroad in there. So he had to move this material up on hand cars, some of it, and they also moved some up on a barge. Building had to be all tore down and moved down the hill to the water so that they could get it to where they could move it out. Then they had to move it up to where the store was, which would be about a mile. And from there on, then they came down with we had an old friend, and he helped haul this stuff up. My dad had one team, and he had the other team. And they hauled all this stuff on the wagons. Then he proceeded first thing he did was build a barn. Now, they didn't have time to clear only the amount of ground it took to put these buildings up. Later on, he built a fairly large house. There were 4 bedrooms upstairs and room to make a bathroom. And that was what we lived in for up until the time that Hydro decided to move us. There was no meetings or anything or explanations given to anybody in the valley. We were more or less, well, I think we were a class that maybe a little lower than 3rd class people, because it was strictly, you're going to have to move because we're going to flood the valley. Well, there was no negotiation. It was just to go in and start telling these people what they were going to get for whatever property they had. Now, a lot of those properties may not have been very much in the eyes of the world today, or even then, but they were homes for those people. They were as good as they could get at that time. While this negotiation was going on, and after we called that meeting at the hall, the people in the clusters, a little group there, that were also objecting very strongly to this. Well, it's not a buyout, it was a steal of the properties of the valley. And so we decided we would go down and put up a protest at Castlegar. There were 4 of us went down from here. when I say here, I'm talking about mostly of Sidmouth, well, all the way to Revelstoke. We went up and we interviewed different people and told them our objection, a point of view, which of course they agreed to. But in most cases, they couldn't see their way clear to be able to go. So anyway, we ended up by going, and I'll name them. John Rocker, he provided the car, and Jack Hall went, and a person by the name of Mitro Toma, who had a sawmill, and he was getting the same type of dealings as the rest of us, which was very poor. I'm trying to be polite here. And so we went down, and when we went to the cusp, there was another carload, another 4 of us. So we ended up down in the Castlegar, and we stood out put up our little picket line out there on the edge of that river, and I'm going to tell you, we didn't last out too long, which I wasn't a bit sorry about, because it was cold, and we had arrived at a kind of an opportune time. Dam building was negotiated on the fact that there would be no strikes by any union or any other people involved in it. What it happened to be that in the union found a loophole in the people that supplied the oil to do the building of the dam down at Castlegar. And so when we set up our little picket line, the first out come those little blue cars, which were hydro cars, and they had numerous amounts of them. They were, I don't know what make they were. I think they were little Fords or something. But anyway, it was quite a little scramble there, and then they wanted to know what we were doing there, naturally. So, and then eventually out came a union man, but I knew before we left the cusp that we had very little chance. There was no real point of how they could contest. We could contest them building this dam. But anyway, out come this representative of the oil companies, and he asked us what our complaint was, and of course it didn't take very long to tell him. And then he said, you know, what we were putting up for an objection, and he said, I would like to take he said, I just put those men back to work I don't know, it was that day or the day before, but he said, I'd like to pull them all out again, but he said, I'm afraid, he said, I can't even help you because there's not enough proof or power in what we were standing there for. And so consequently, our picket line didn't last very long. But at least I'm proud to say I objected, and I'm not ashamed to say it either. We got very little assistance from Revelstoke. Whenever we would talk about it, they would say, well, you can't stop progress. Well, perhaps not. They didn't want to stop progress. Their mind was not on helping this valley. There's no outlying area to produce food, you know, fresh food or anything along that line, or any industry that, well, other than logging. So I think in the long run, Revelstoke was a loser of it. Then they brought in a demolition crew, which was the people that were to burn the property and clean up the properties. In our case, when they came along, I said, that isn't going to happen here. I said, my dad put these buildings here. I said, my dad will take them away. I said, don't you come anywhere near this property. They listened to that, and they didn't. My dad came up from, he at that time had moved to Creston, and so they came up, and my brother also came, and the three of us stood there and watched those buildings burn. It wasn't nice. And I could tell you now, we timed it, and lots of them only took 20 minutes till they were down. The house took longer because there was more material in it, but the big barn, we had a big hip roof barn, and it took a little while to start, and then all of a sudden it almost went like a bomb. Once that gases formed up in the larger part of the barn, then but prior to that, When this man came around, he was going to do the assessment of the property for buying of it. And so he said, Charlie Watson, he was not a bad man. He was one of the better quality people that they had hired. And actually, I felt sorry for him in a way. I mean, he had to tell these people what little they were going to get. And he came along, and I wanted him to say, I'd like you to give me a price on the buildings, and then give me a price on the land. Oh, no, we don't do that. We give you an overall price. I said, well, now are you going to give me the valuation of the for the clearing of the as cleared land, agricultural land? Oh, no, that'll be all in the same price. And I said, well, that isn't right. Well, that's the way it is. And so there was no negotiation on that at all. The same price was valued on the whole property, and it was including uncleared land and cleared land. The valuation, of course, was rather low. There were three of us that actually farmed to a little larger than most of them. Most of them are very small properties. You know, they'd have 40 acres, but they wouldn't be all cleared. So they had outside jobs, a lot of the people in the valley. The Hall brothers were farmers. They had a lot of nice property. They had good producing land, but it was subject to flood, you know, high water floods. And they went into cattle. So, and I eventually went into cattle. I started out with some milk cows and so forth afterward, but I switched over to beef cattle. So consequently, and Ole Anderson now is, again, I must bring Ole in because Ole and Sarah, they were good cattle people. They had a very fine herd of Hereford cattle. Stan Hall was the one that hauled them we hauled them to Kamloops. He had their truck and I had mine. They were both small trucks, but we traveled together. Then we stayed over, went to the auction in Kamloops, and then the Hall brothers at that time were buying calves. They'd buy calves, sell the adults or yearlings or 2-year-olds at the sale, then buy the calves back, feed them all winter, and then sell them the following. I would take my cattle over and Stan take his. Then I'd help if he had an overload. I would haul some of them back for him. When we sold our properties or gave our properties to them at their price, we had to just get rid of our equipment and our cattle as well. And so the equipment we take to an equipment dealer in, Salmon Arm is where we dealt, because that was the closest place. And the cattle we would take to Kamloops to the auction sale. The whole thing made you very bitter because of the way it was handled. I mean, it wasn't as if they were negotiating like on a proper manner across the table. You were given a price, and that was it. Well, that isn't negotiating. That's stealing. Long after the farm was gone, but I had another thing to deal with. And you could tell by the tone that the people I was dealing with were not really proud of what was done with this valley. Thank goodness. There was some compassion, because there was very, very little of it ever shown while they were dealing with us. Anything that was above 1449 water level, I wanted. And so they agreed they would allow us to buy it back, but not at the price they paid us. The price they paid us was about half of what they charged us to buy our own property back. That's the kind of justice